King's Landing was a city scarred by fire and blood. The streets were littered with debris, the Red Keep's walls blackened by smoke. And yet, amid the chaos, Robb Stark stood victorious. Against all odds, his forces had breached the Lannister defenses, and among the prisoners was the most dangerous prize of all, Cersei Lannister, captured alive. Her golden hair was streaked with ash and sweat, her gown torn, but her eyes still blazed with defiance and cunning. Robb knew that executing her immediately might inflame the Westerlands and prolong the war, so he decided to keep her as a political weapon. Cersei, ever aware of her value, began plotting as soon as she was confined. She whispered carefully to the guards, sowing doubt and hinting at rewards if treated well, using her charm as subtly as a knife in the dark. Even in chains, she was dangerous, capable of turning loyalty into betrayal if given the slightest chance. Robb's council was divided. Some demanded her immediate death, seeing her capture as the perfect end to the Lannister. Others, including his more cautious advisors, urged patience, warning of her intelligence and ability to manipulate even the strongest men. Robb felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. This was more than a political decision. It was a test of his judgment, his mercy, and his strength as a leader. That evening, Robb visited her personally. Cersei rose slowly as he entered, a faint, calculating smile on her lips. "King Stark," she said softly, "I am at your mercy, yet even now I can serve your cause, if you choose wisely." Robb studied her carefully, weighing the danger against the opportunity. Her presence was a gamble, a living weapon in the Game of Thrones, and how he played it could tip the balance of power in the realm. Guards stood alert outside, the air thick with tension, while inside, to Mines, the captured queen and the young northern king measured each other in silence, each plotting the next move. The next morning, Cersei awoke to the sound of footsteps echoing outside her chamber. She had spent the night calculating, remembering every slight, every advantage she could exploit. Her captors treated her carefully, yet she sensed hesitation in their movements. Even in defeat, she understood power, subtle, psychological, deadly. She knew that patience and manipulation could still give her the upper hand. Robb summoned his council again. He proposed using Cersei to force Tywin Lannister into a negotiation. Some northern lords were furious at the idea. Why bargain with a snake? Great Jon Umber growled, "She's a traitor, a murderer, kill her and end this." Maester Luwin, however, advised caution. Underestimating her could be fatal. She may be imprisoned, but she is far from powerless. Robb weighed their words, realizing that Cersei could be a double-edged sword. Meanwhile, Cersei began testing the boundaries of her captivity. She offered small pieces of information about the Lannister forces, hinting at weaknesses she might exploit while carefully concealing her true plans. Robb noticed the subtlety and suspected her games, yet he also understood her intelligence could serve his purpose if guided properly. He decided to play along, using her as a bargaining chip to gain strategic advantage by midday. Cersei was brought to a meeting with Robb and his closest advisors. She walked with the grace of a queen, though her wrists bore chains. Her voice, calm and measured, filled the hall. "I know the North respects honor," she said. "I am yours to command, but remember awards follow those who use me wisely. My family's loyalty is not gone, only redirected." Robb listened carefully, seeing both a threat and an opportunity. The city might be under his control, but controlling the queen would require more than guards, and change it would require careful minds and patient. Strategy. That afternoon, Robb walked the city walls alone, thinking of the delicate balance he now held. The streets were empty, yet the echoes of battle and death lingered. He realized that holding Cersei alive was more dangerous than any army. Her mind was sharper than swords, and even the smallest misstep could unravel everything he had fought for. And somewhere in the Red Keep, Cersei was already plotting her next move. A step ahead in a deadly game of patience and power. Days passed in King's Landing, and the tension between captor and captive grew sharper with each hour. Cersei had adapted quickly to her confinement, using every conversation and glance to test Robb's resolve. She whispered to guards about possible secret alliances, offered hints of hidden treasure, and feigned vulnerability when it suited her. Every word was measured, every smile calculated. Robb noticed her games, but remained outwardly composed. Knowing that showing fear or anger would only empower her, Robb began to understand that keeping Cersei alive was not just about politics. It was a test of his patience and judgment. He summoned her daily, asking questions about the Lannister army, the state of the city, and Tywin's likely moves. She answered selectively, giving just enough truth to seem cooperative, but always leaving gaps for misdirection. Each meeting was a battle of wits. Cersei probing for weaknesses, Robb measuring how much to trust, how much to exploit. One evening, as candles flickered in the council chamber, Cersei spoke with a hint of sly humor. "King Stark," she said, "you've captured me, yet I see a hesitation in you. Fear, perhaps respect, or a question of what happens when my father learns I am alive." Robb's expression remained unreadable, but inside he weighed her words carefully. She was testing him, seeking cracks in his armor, and he realized that underestimating her could undo everything. Meanwhile, whispers of her capture spread through King's Landing. Some citizens saw her as a broken queen, others still feared her influence. Robb decided to use her presence to his advantage, sending messages to Tywin Lannister, hinting that the queen was in his hands. It was a delicate game. He needed to appear firm but not cruel, strategic but not weak. Cersei, of course, welcomed the attention, knowing every letter, every rumor could be twisted to her advantage. By the week's end, a strange dynamic had formed. Robb had power over Cersei, yet she held a subtle power over him, a test of his patience, his morality, and his strategic mind. He realized that winning battles with armies was simple compared to winning battles of intellect against someone like Cersei Lannister. And as she rested in her chamber that night, plotting her next move, Robb stared at the city from the walls, knowing that controlling her would demand not just strength, but cunning as well. Robb Stark realized that the true advantage of keeping Cersei alive lay not in punishment, but in leverage. He sent carefully worded messages to Tywin Lannister, hinting that his daughter was alive and in Stark hands, and that negotiations could prevent further bloodshed. The Northern King's plan was bold: use Cersei to force the Lannisters into submission without spilling more Northern blood. Yet he knew the Ristywin was cunning, and Cersei's mind was sharper than most men he had faced. Cersei quickly understood her role in this delicate game. Each letter, each message to her father was a tool to manipulate both sides. She framed her words with subtle warnings, sowed seeds of distrust among Tywin's generals, and hinted at possible betrayals within the north, even while confined. She moved like a shadow across the chessboard of Westeros, unseen but influential. Robb's advisors cautioned him repeatedly. She was a master manipulator, and every choice carried danger. But Robb had learned patience, and he began to exploit her cunning rather than fear it. In the evenings, Robb met with Cersei alone. The walls of her chamber seemed smaller than the weight of the tension within them. "Your father will not yield." "Easily," Robb said, his voice measured. Cersei smiled faintly, her eyes glinting. "And yet, you hold the queen. One move, and he must reckon with me. It is not only my survival at stake, King Stark, but your influence over the realm." She spoke as if it were a game, yet every word contained subtle threats. Robb listened, testing his own resolve, aware that his decisions could change the fates of thousands. Meanwhile, Tywin's response was swift. Envoys arrived in King's Landing under banners of truce, offering negotiations for the Queen's safe return. Robb convened his council, weighing options carefully. Some northern lords urged him to take Tywin's offer as proof of weakness, and to demand more concessions, while others reminded him that Tywin Lannister was not a man to trust. Cersei observed each meeting with quiet satisfaction, knowing that her very presence was bending the course of strategy in her favor. As the sun set over the ruined city, Robb walked the walls, watching the faint lights flicker in the distance. He understood that the game had shifted from armies and bloodshed to influence and intellect. Holding Cersei was more than a political tool, it was a test of his wisdom, patience, and courage. And somewhere inside the Red Keep, the Queen plotted, relentlessly, her mind a weapon sharper than any sword, ready to strike at the slightest opportunity. Negotiations with Tywin Lannister began in earnest. Robb Stark, accompanied by his closest advisors, met the Lannister envoys in a guarded chamber within the Red Keep. Cersei watched from her confinement, a quiet observer whose presence carried more weight than any army. Tywin's envoys offered concessions, lands, wealth, and promises of loyalty in exchange for her release. But Robb sensed the subtle arrogance beneath their words. Tywin was testing him, gauging whether the young king could be manipulated. Cersei, meanwhile, whispered carefully to the guards and servants who brought her food. She painted visions of northern cruelty and Stark overreach, insinuating that even allies might not fully trust Robb. Her words, innocent on the surface, planted seeds of doubt and caution, forcing Robb to think not only about Tywin, but about the loyalty of his own council. The Queen's skill was evident. She could bend perception without raising her voice, manipulate emotions without overt threats. Robb, aware of her influence, played his own game. He allowed Cersei to speak, letting her craft her subtle manipulations, but he monitored every interaction, noting who was susceptible to her charm. The king realized that power in Westeros was rarely absolute. It was shared, borrowed, and sometimes stolen through guile rather than force. By keeping Cersei alive, he had not only a hostage, but a key to shifting alliances and destabilizing Lannister control. During one particularly tense meeting, Cersei spoke with her characteristic mix of elegance and menace. "King Stark," she said softly, "sometimes mercy is the greatest strength. Tywin may be proud, but even pride can bend when faced with the right threat." Robb understood the subtlety. She was reminding him that the Lannisters' power rested as much on fear and perception as on armies. He had to wield her influence carefully, for one misstep could turn his advantage into catastrophe. As the sun dipped behind the ruined city, Robb returned to the walls, reflecting on the precarious position he now held. King's Landing was his, yet the city teetered between loyalty and rebellion. Cersei, though chained, remained the most dangerous presence in the Red Keep. Her mind was a battlefield, and the greatest challenge for Robb was not fighting armies, but containing a queen whose influence reached further than any sword. In the days to come, every decision, every conversation, and every movement would carry the weight of life and death for him, for the North, and for the realm itself. As the negotiations dragged on, Robb began to see the subtle ways Cersei was influencing not just Tywin, but his own council. Small disputes arose among his bannermen, sparked by the Queen's whispers or half-true stories she let slip. She implied that certain northern lords were over-ambitious, planting distrust and making Robb's advisors second-guess each other. Even the most loyal men found themselves uneasy, wondering how much of her manipulation might be true. Cersei, chained yet unbowed, thrived in the tension. She never raised her voice, never demanded favors openly, but every word she spoke was designed to unsettle. "King Stark," she said one evening, "power is a delicate thing. Hold it too tightly, and it can slip through your fingers. Hold it wisely, and even enemies will bend to your will." Robb understood the danger. She was teaching him a lesson about leadership, using her survival as a lesson in control. Meanwhile, Tywin grew frustrated. Each envoy returned with vague reports of northern resolve, hints that Robb would not simply release his daughter for gold or land. Tywin began to see that Cersei's capture had become a liability. His daughter's presence in the Red Keep was bending even his enemies' actions in unpredictable ways. Robb sensed the shift, realizing that he had more leverage than ever, but he also knew the situation was a powder keg. A single rash decision could destroy everything. Robb's strategy evolved. He allowed Cersei to meet with certain envoys under strict supervision, using her influence to gauge Tywin's moves and test the loyalty of his own allies. He began to see her not just as a prisoner, but as a tool, a dangerous one, capable of turning perception into power. Every day, he walked the line between mercy and control, knowing that one misstep could unleash chaos in King's Landing by the end of the week. A fragile balance had formed. Robb controlled the city, Tywin was forced into careful diplomacy, and Cersei, though captive, had become a central figure in the game of power. The North had gained a city and a bargaining chip, but the cost was constant vigilance. The Queen's mind remained a sharp blade, and Robb knew that every move he made would be tested against her cunning. In Westeros, he realized, victory was never just about winning battles. It was about controlling the minds of those who could destroy you. Weeks passed, and the tension in King's Landing grew unbearable. Cersei, once silent and cautious, began to push boundaries. She challenged Robb subtly during council meetings, questioning strategies and insinuating that certain northern lords were too rash or untrustworthy. Every word was measured, designed to provoke thought, doubt, or even conflict among his advisors. Robb noticed, recognizing that the Queen was testing his ability to lead under pressure. Cersei also reached out through hidden channels. Servants and minor officials carried her, whispered messages, sowing uncertainty and quietly bending loyalties. She suggested that some northern lords might benefit from a more cautious approach, planting seeds of doubt without overtly opposing Robb. Even the most steadfast bannermen began to hesitate, unsure whether their king's judgment could be trusted in every decision. It was a psychological battlefield, and Cersei moved like a general, invisible yet commanding. Robb, however, was learning to anticipate her moves. He met with her privately, challenging her subtly, testing her patience and intelligence. "You speak of loyalty," he said one evening, "yet you manipulate everyone around you. Is that survival or ambition?" Cersei smiled, unflinching. Survival and ambition are the same in Westeros, King Stark. One cannot exist without the other, but I am yours to command, if you can. Her words were both a warning and a compliment, a reminder that even in chains, she remained dangerous. Tywin, meanwhile, grew increasingly wary. Envoys reported that Cersei's presence was shifting alliances and perceptions. The Northern King held her not with cruelty, but with strategy, and her very survival was bending Tywin's carefully laid plans. Robb realized the full extent of his leverage. He could negotiate, manipulate, and even divide his enemies, all while keeping a queen who had once sought his destruction alive by the week's end. King's Landing was a city under subtle warknot, of swords, but of minds. Cersei remained the key, a living threat, an opportunity rolled into one. Robb had learned that power in Westeros was rarely absolute. It was shaped by perception, influence, and patience. He held the city, he held the queen, and yet he understood that the game was far from over. One wrong move, one misread glance, could unravel all he had fought to achieve. The city had grown tense with anticipation. Robb Stark, standing atop the walls of the Red Keep, contemplated the delicate balance he now held. Cersei had become more than a prisoner. She was a test of his judgment, patience, and cunning. Every council meeting, every envoy, every whispered message had shaped the political landscape. Tywin Lannister was cautious, calculating, and wary, knowing that his daughter's survival was shifting power in ways he had never anticipated. Cersei, for her part, had perfected the art of subtle manipulation. She had earned glimpses of influence, turning doubts into tools, bending perception without overtly challenging Robb. Yet, she also knew her survival depended on restraint. The moment she overplayed her hand, the young king could crush her influence entirely. She walked the fine line between threat and ally, knowing that one wrong step could end her life, but one clever move could restore her family's power. Robb convened a final council with his bannermen. They debated what to do with Cersei. Some demanded execution, insisting that a living queen was too dangerous. Others argued for continued leverage, pointing out that Tywin's respect or fear was already bending toward the north. Robb weighed their advice carefully, understanding that mercy and strategy were intertwined in ways. He realized that controlling Cersei alive gave him a power no army could match, influence over his greatest enemies, and a bargaining chip that could reshape alliances. That night, he met Cersei privately one last time. She stood before him, unbowed, her eyes sharp and calculating. "King Stark," she said softly, "you have shown wisdom in restraint. Few would have the patience to hold me alive. What will you do now? Kill me or use me?" Robb studied her, knowing that his choice would define the North's future and the realm's stability. He saw her cunning, her ambition, her potential, to destroy or to serve. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady and resolute. "You will live," he said, "not as my enemy, not as my ally yet, but as a reminder that in this world, survival and power walk hand in hand. Your fate will be tied to your choices, Cersei. Make them wisely." Cersei's eyes glimmered with a mixture of relief and calculation. She bowed slightly, acknowledging that her survival was secured for now. The city slept under a fragile peace. The North held strong, and Robb Stark understood that the greatest battles were not always fought with swords, but with minds and hearts. The Game of Thrones continued, but for the first time, one queen had been captured alive, her power contained yet potent, and the young king had learned that mercy could be as formidable a weapon as war.